For 43 years I wore the same type of navy blue coveralls to work. My name was stitched above the pocket, Leonard. I fixed machines at the textile factory on the edge of town, the kind of place where the noise never stops and the air always smells like hot metal and oil. People saw me and thought they knew my whole story. Working man. Simple life. Probably living paycheck to paycheck. They had no idea. When I retired at 67, my son Daniel threw me what he called a retirement party, at his house. The house he rented, I should say. It was a nice enough place, a 3-bedroom colonial with a front porch and a yard big enough for his 2 kids to play in. I sat in a folding chair in the backyard while Daniel grilled hot dogs and his wife, Melissa, brought out a grocery store cake with "Happy Retirement Dad" written in blue icing. Before we continue, I'm Leonard, and please subscribe to my Side of Revenge channel, and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. So what are you going to do now? Daniel asked, flipping a hot dog that was already turning black on one side. You gonna be okay on that pension? I'll manage, I said. My daughter Sophie was there too, sitting at the patio table with her husband, Kevin. She kept giving me these concerned looks, the kind you'd give to a wounded bird. Like I might collapse right there between the folding chairs and the kiddie pool. Dad, you know if you need anything you can ask us, she said, reaching across to pat my hand. Her voice had that careful tone people use when they're trying to be generous but hope you won't actually take them up on it. The kind of tone that makes you feel small even when the words sound big. I appreciate that, sweetheart. Because I know that pension probably isn't much, she continued, her fingers still resting on mine. And with just Social Security on top of that, well, things are tight for everyone these days. I nodded and took a bite of my hot dog. It was burnt. The char scraped against my teeth, bitter and overdone, but I chewed anyway. Sometimes you swallow things that don't taste right because the alternative is harder. Kevin chimed in, leaning back in his chair with his beer, the condensation dripping onto the plastic armrest. You should think about downsizing, Leonard. Maybe find a little apartment. These houses are expensive to maintain, you know? Property taxes, utilities, all that stuff. The house is paid off, I reminded them. Sure, but still, Kevin pressed, waving his beer like it added weight to his argument. You're not getting any younger. Stairs, yard work, snow shoveling in winter. Maybe it's time to simplify. I just smiled and nodded. I was good at that. Smiling and nodding. 43 years of factory work teaches you when to speak and when to let people think they're helping. Daniel scraped the last of the hot dogs onto a plate, the metal spatula scraping against the grill with a sound that made me wince. Hey Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. The landlord is raising our rent again. 3rd time in 5 years. It's getting ridiculous. That's tough, I said. Yeah, it is, Daniel said, sitting down with his own plate, his shoulders sagging under the weight of it. We're paying $2,200 a month now. For a rental. Can you believe that? Melissa shook her head, her ponytail swinging with the force of her frustration. We've been trying to save for a down payment, but every time we get close, something comes up. Car repairs, the kids' school stuff, medical bills. It never ends. We'll figure it out, Daniel said, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. The doubt. The way hope sounds when it's running out of room. Sophie jumped in, always ready with advice she'd never had to follow herself. You guys should talk to the landlord. Maybe negotiate something. Kevin and I rented for years before we bought, and you really have to advocate for yourself. We've tried, Melissa said quietly. He doesn't budge. Said it's market rate, take it or leave it. I stayed quiet, watching my grandchildren chase each other around the yard. They were good kids. Daniel and Melissa were good parents even if they were struggling. Even if the weight of it was visible in the way Daniel's smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. I thought about saying something then, about stepping in and fixing it the way I'd fixed machines for 4 decades. But the timing didn't feel right. Instead, I just finished my burnt hot dog and listened to them talk about their problems. Problems I could solve with a single phone call. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know that. Not yet. The next few months were interesting in a painful sort of way. Daniel started calling me more often, and at first I thought maybe he just wanted to check in on his old man. Maybe retirement had made him sentimental. Made him realize time was finite and family mattered. But the conversations always drifted to the same place. Hey Dad, just wanted to make sure you're eating okay. You know, with a tight budget and all. I'm fine, son. Because there's no shame in it, you know. Food banks, assistance programs. People use them all the time. I'm really fine. Okay, but if you need anything. His voice would trail off, waiting for me to fill the silence with admissions of struggle. But I never did. Sophie did the same thing, but her approach was more direct. She invited me to dinner one Sunday in late September, and halfway through the meal, she slid a manila envelope across the table. The sound of paper on wood made Melissa look up from her plate, curious. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some information," Sophie said, her tone bright and helpful, like she was handing me a life raft instead of an insult wrapped in concern. "About senior programs in the area. Meal deliveries, housing assistance, Medicare supplement options. I put together a little folder for you." I opened it. She'd printed out applications, highlighted phone numbers in yellow marker, even included a list of free activities at the senior center. Bingo on Tuesdays. Chair yoga on Thursdays. Coffee socials every Friday morning at 9. "That's thoughtful of you," I said, because it was. In its own misguided way, it was. "I worry about you, Dad. Living alone in that big house on your fixed income. I just want to make sure you're taken care of." "I'm taken care of," Kevin added, cutting into his chicken like he was making a point with the knife. "You know, Leonard, pride can be a real problem for guys your age. There's help out there. You worked hard your whole life, you deserve support now." I folded the envelope and set it aside, next to my water glass. "I'll look through it." But I never did. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I filed it away in a drawer with old receipts and instruction manuals for appliances I'd long since replaced. Not because I was angry. Because I understood. They saw what they expected to see. A man in worn coveralls. A man who'd spent his life in a factory. A man who needed saving. The assumption that I was broke became a running theme. At family gatherings, conversations would stop when I walked into the room, then resume in hushed tones once I'd settled into a chair. Like I couldn't hear the change in pitch, the sudden pivot to safer topics. They started buying me groceries without asking, showing up at my door with bags from the discount supermarket. "We had extras," Sophie would say, even though the bags were clearly a planned shopping trip. Store-brand cereal. Generic pasta. The kind of toilet paper that feels like sandpaper. Daniel started mowing my lawn without asking. "I was in the neighborhood anyway," he'd say, even though he lived 20 minutes away. Even though I could see the sweat on his forehead from the drive, from loading the mower into his truck, from the effort of caring for me in the only way he knew how. They meant well. I knew that. But it stung in a way I hadn't expected. For 43 years I'd been invisible at that factory. I fixed the machines that kept the place running, and nobody noticed until something broke. Until production stopped and someone had to find Leonard, the guy who could make anything work again. Now, in retirement, I was invisible in a different way. They looked at my coveralls, my calloused hands, my modest lifestyle, and saw someone who needed saving. They never asked about my finances. They just assumed. And assumptions, I'd learned, were dangerous things. They filled in gaps with guesses. They turned silence into stories that had nothing to do with truth. The real problem started in November. Daniel called me on a Tuesday afternoon, and I could hear the panic in his voice before he even said hello. The kind of panic that comes when the ground shifts under your feet and you realize you're standing on something that was never solid to begin with. "Dad, we gotta notice. The landlord is selling the house." "Selling it?" "Yeah." His breath came fast, uneven. "We have 90 days to either buy it or move out. And Dad, we can't buy it. We don't have the down payment, and even if we did, the banks won't give us a good enough rate with my credit score from that medical debt a few years back." Melissa was crying in the background. I could hear her trying to muffle it, trying to be strong for Daniel, but grief has a sound that carries through walls and phone lines. "We finally got settled here," Daniel continued, his voice cracking on the word settled. "The kids are in a good school district. We know the neighbors. Mrs. Patterson next door watches them when Melissa has late shifts. And now we have to uproot everything and find a new place in the middle of the school year. Do you know how hard it is to find a decent rental in this market?" "I'm sorry, son." "Yeah. Me too." He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath, the kind you take when you're about to ask for something you don't want to ask for. "Listen, Dad, I hate to ask this, but is there any way you could help us out? Even just a little toward a deposit on a new place? I know money's tight for you, but we're desperate." There it was. The moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The moment when my silence would either break or solidify into something permanent. "Let me think about it," I said. "Okay. Thanks, Dad. I know you can't do much, but anything helps." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone. The afternoon light slanted through the window above the sink, catching dust motes in the air. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall. 43 years. That's how long I'd been making decisions like this. Quiet decisions. Decisions nobody saw until the results showed up. Then I made a call of my own. 2 weeks later, Daniel called again. This time his voice was different. Confused. Maybe a little scared. Like he'd opened a door expecting one thing and found something else entirely. "Dad, something weird happened." "What's that?" "We got a letter from a property management company. They said the house sold and they're the new managers. They want to meet with us about the lease terms." "That's good, isn't it? Means you don't have to move." "Yeah, but Dad." He paused and I could hear paper rustling, like he was holding the letter up to the light, searching for hidden ink. "The letter says the new owner wants to offer us a rent reduction. 40% less than what we're paying now." "Who does that?" "Who buys a rental property and immediately drops the rent." "Maybe someone who doesn't need the money," I suggested, keeping my voice level. "Neutral. It doesn't make sense. We're trying to figure out who bought it. The property records are public, but it's under some LLC name. Melissa's been researching all day. Something called Clearwater Holdings. No website. No social media. Nothing." "I wouldn't worry too much about it," I said. "Just be grateful." "Yeah, but it's weird, right?" "Sometimes weird is good, Daniel." He went quiet for a moment. Then softer, "You're right. I keep waiting for the catch. For someone to tell us it was a mistake." "No mistake," I said. "Sometimes good things just happen." Sophie called that evening, right as the sun was setting and the sky outside my window turned that particular shade of orange that only happens in November. The kind of light that makes everything look temporary. "Dad, did you hear about Daniel's house?" I did. "Isn't it strange? I mean, I'm happy for them, but who does something like that? Someone with different priorities, I suppose. Kevin thinks it might be a scam. Like they'll ask for money up front or something. You know how these things work. Too good to be true usually means there's a catch." "I don't think so." "How do you know?" "Just a feeling." She was quiet for a moment and I could hear her breathing, thinking. "Dad, you sound different. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart. Better than fine, actually." "What do you mean?" "Just enjoying retirement," I said, which wasn't a lie. Just not the whole truth. The truth came out at Christmas. We were all gathered at Daniel's house again, the house he was still renting, though now at a price that actually allowed him and Melissa to save money each month. To breathe. To stop checking their bank balance every morning with that look of dread people get when numbers control their lives. The kids were playing with new toys in the corner, shrieking with the kind of joy that only happens when you're young enough to believe in magic. The adults were sitting around the living room with coffee and pie, the kind of scene that belongs on greeting cards but rarely happens in real life. Except it was happening now. Daniel raised his cup, the ceramic mug with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side. "I want to make a toast. To whoever bought this house and decided to be a decent human being. We still don't know who you are, but thank you. You saved our family." I set down my coffee. The cup made a small sound against the saucer, louder than it should have been in the sudden quiet. "Actually, you do know who I am." The room went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of a family at ease, but the kind of silence that happens right before something breaks. "What?" Daniel said. "I bought the house." Sophie's fork clattered against her plate, the sound sharp enough to make one of the kids look up from their toys. "You, what?" "I bought the house in September. Before you got the notice. The previous landlord was planning to sell anyway, and I made him an offer." Daniel just stared at me, his mouth half open, his brain clearly trying to process information that didn't fit with everything he thought he knew. "Dad, how did you?" "I mean, we thought." "You thought I was broke," I finished. "I know. You all did." Melissa found her voice first, small and uncertain. "But how? How did you afford this?" I leaned back in my chair, the old leather creaking under my weight. The same chair I'd sat in 4 months ago at my retirement party, eating burnt hot dogs and listening to them worry about me. When I started at the factory 43 years ago, I was making $6 an hour. But I didn't just work the floor. I fixed machines, sure, but I also figured out how to make them more efficient. Sophie was shaking her head slowly, like she could physically deny what she was hearing. "I held patents on 3 different modifications that the company licensed out," I continued. "Every time they used my designs, I got a cut. Not a big cut, but steady. For 43 years. Every month, without fail, royalty checks came in. Small enough that I didn't think about them. Big enough that they added up." Kevin set down his beer carefully. "Patents? 3 of them. Modifications to the threading system, the tension calibration mechanism, and the automated shutdown sequence. The company saved millions in downtime and fabric waste. I got a percentage." "Why didn't you ever tell us?" Sophie asked, and I could hear the hurt creeping into her voice. The betrayal of a secret kept. Because I didn't need to, I said simply. I lived simply because I liked living simply. I drove old cars because they ran fine. I wore work clothes because they were comfortable. I didn't need a fancy house or expensive vacations. Your mother and I were happy with what we had. Daniel was shaking his head, still processing. But you let us think. We were trying to help you. We bought you groceries. I know. And I appreciated it. Even if I didn't need it, I appreciated that you cared. I looked around the room at their faces. Sophie's confusion. Kevin's embarrassment. Melissa's shock. Daniel's hurt. The groceries you bought? I donated most of them to the church food bank. But the fact that you thought of me? That mattered. Then why didn't you say something? Sophie asked, and now the hurt was fully present, raw and exposed. Why let us go on thinking you were struggling? I was quiet for a moment, choosing my words carefully. This was the part that mattered. The part they needed to understand. Because I wanted to see if you'd care even if I was broke. And you did. You both did. That mattered to me more than you know. The room was silent except for the kids playing in the next room, their laughter a strange counterpoint to the heavy air in here. Kevin finally spoke up, his voice smaller than before. So, you're not poor? Not even a little bit, I said. Between the patents, the pension investments I made over the years and Social Security, I'm doing just fine. Better than fine. Your mother and I were careful. We lived below our means for 4 decades. Not because we had to. Because we wanted to build something that would matter when it counted. Daniel put his face in his hands. I can't believe this. All this time, we've been treating you like you were one step away from the poorhouse. And you were kind about it, I said, my voice soft. That's what I needed to know. That if I did need help someday you'd be there. Not because I had money, but because I'm your father. Sophie was crying now, tears running down her cheeks in steady streams. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to make you feel like... You didn't make me feel bad, I interrupted gently. You made me feel loved. There's a difference. I reached across and took her hand, the way she'd taken mine at that dinner when she gave me the manila envelope. When you gave me that folder of senior programs. When you bought me discount groceries. When Daniel mowed my lawn every week. Those weren't insults. They were proof. Proof of what? Daniel asked quietly. That you'd love me even if I had nothing to give you. Melissa wiped her eyes with her napkin. But the house, the rent reduction. I'm dropping it another 10% next year, I said. And when you're ready to buy, I'll sell to you at the price I paid. No profit. Just enough to get my money back. Call it a long-term investment in my grandchildren's stability. Daniel just got up and hugged me then, something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. His arms wrapped around my shoulders, tight and desperate and full of things he couldn't say with words. Thank you, Dad. You're welcome. But there's a condition. He pulled back, his eyes still wet. What's that? You stop mowing my lawn without asking. I like doing it myself. Keeps me active. He laughed, and the tension in the room finally broke like a fever. Sophie was laughing too, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Even Kevin cracked a smile, though I could see the embarrassment still sitting heavy on his shoulders. And Kevin? I said. He looked up, startled. Yeah. That advice about downsizing? Keep it. I might actually need it someday. Just not yet. The rest of Christmas passed in a blur of explanations and questions. How long had I been planning this? September. Did Mom know about the patents? Every detail. Why this house specifically? Because Daniel's family lived in it, and home isn't about walls and roofs. It's about the people who make the space matter. Sophie wanted to know about the patents themselves, about how I'd come up with the modifications. I told her about the late nights at the factory, about the way machines spoke to you if you listen long enough. About how your mother always said I was smarter than anyone gave me credit for, and how that belief kept me going through years of being invisible. Daniel wanted to know about the finances, about how I'd managed to save so much while looking like I had so little. I explained the investments, the careful budgeting, the way compound interest works when you give it 4 decades to grow. The way living modestly isn't the same as living poorly. Melissa just kept thanking me over and over, until I had to tell her to stop because gratitude doesn't need to be repeated to be real. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my own house, in my own chair, drinking my own coffee. The house was quiet the way I liked it. Not the empty quiet of loneliness, but the full quiet of satisfaction. I thought about Daniel and Melissa and those grandkids who'd have a stable home now. About Sophie and how she'd organized that whole folder of resources for me, genuinely thinking I needed it. About Kevin's awkward apology and his promise to never give unsolicited advice again. They weren't perfect. None of us are. But they loved me even when they thought I had nothing to give them. That was worth more than any patent or investment or pile of money in the bank. The funny thing about being underestimated is that it gives you room to move quietly. While everyone assumed I was just getting by, I was actually building something. Not for show, not for status, but for moments exactly like this. For the ability to help my family without them even knowing they were being helped, and then to reveal it when the time was right. When it would mean the most. I worked 43 years in those navy blue coveralls and people saw a factory worker. But I was always more than that. I was a father, a husband, an inventor, an investor, and a man who understood that the best kind of wealth is the kind you can give away to the people you love. They thought I was broke after retirement. But I'd never been richer in my life. 6 months later. Daniel and Melissa are still renting from me, but they've saved enough for a proper down payment now. We've started the process of transferring the deed. The paperwork sits on my kitchen table, waiting for signatures and notary stamps and all the official things that make a gift legally binding. Sophie calls me every week now. Not to offer help but just to talk. She asks me about the patents sometimes, about what it was like to come up with those designs. About the moment I realized I'd created something valuable. I tell her stories about her mother, about how she always believed I was smarter than anyone gave me credit for. About how she'd sit with me at the kitchen table while I sketched modifications on napkins, never doubting that those napkins would turn into something real. Kevin apologized 3 times for the downsizing comment. 3 separate conversations, each one more awkward than the last. I told him to forget it. He's actually not a bad guy, just a little too quick to give advice. Too eager to fix problems that aren't his to fix. But he's learning. We all are. The grandkids still don't know any of this. To them, I'm just Grandpa Leonard who fixes things and tells long stories about machines that talk if you listen hard enough. Someday when they're older, maybe Daniel will tell them about the house. About how their grandfather bought it without anyone knowing. About how wealth isn't always visible, and the most valuable things are often the ones you can't see. But for now, I'm just the guy who shows up to their birthday parties and eats burnt hot dogs and smiles and nods while the adults talk. The guy who brings practical gifts like savings bonds and sturdy shoes. The guy who looks exactly like what people expect when they picture a retired factory worker. And you know what? I'm perfectly fine with that. Some people spend their whole lives trying to prove they're worth something. I spent mine proving I didn't need to prove anything at all. That's the real secret they don't tell you about money. It's not about what you have. It's about what you can do with it when nobody's watching. When there's no audience to applaud your generosity. No social media post to document your sacrifice. No public recognition for being decent. And what I did with mine was give my son a home, give my grandchildren stability, and give myself the satisfaction of knowing that when everything was stripped away, when they thought I had nothing, my family still loved me. That's a kind of wealth you can't buy, patent, or invest in. That's the kind of wealth that actually matters. I still wear those navy blue coveralls sometimes. Not to work anymore, obviously. But when I'm fixing things around the house. When I'm in the garage, tinkering with machines that don't need fixing but respond to my attention anyway. The coveralls are soft now, worn smooth by 4 decades of use. Comfortable in the way old things become when they've shaped themselves to fit you. My name is still stitched above the pocket, Leonard. And people still think they know my whole story when they see me. They still have no idea. But that's okay. Some stories aren't meant to be read at first glance. Some stories take 43 years to write, and only reveal themselves when the final chapter is ready. This is my story. And it ends exactly where it should. With family, with love, and with the quiet satisfaction of knowing I played the long game and won. Not because I was richer than they thought, but because I was loved more than money could ever measure.